A single, crackling smack reverberated through the Smithfield County courtroom. Officer Mark Rowan's open palm connected with Judge Benjamin Carter's cheek in a flash of red light. For a heartbeat, the world froze. The mother clutching her son gasped. Pens hovered over notepads, and the live stream court cam feed stalled on the moment of impact. Judge Carter held his ground. He met Rowan's furious glare with a calm, steady gaze. Then, as if addressing every viewer halfway across the globe, he leaned close to the camera and quietly asked, "Tell us where you're watching from. What would you do if you saw this?" A split screen appeared on the live stream. One side lingered on the bruise blooming on Carter's cheek, the other on the chat window exploding with locations. Charlotte, Detroit, Dallas. Comments scrolled by in real time, a chorus of shock and outrage. Before Rowan could recover, a bailiff's radio crackled. "Precinct 9 funds frozen. $325,000. The words blinked in crimson text at the bottom of the screen, matched by the sudden deactivation of Rowan's badge icon on the digital interface. No warning, no intermediary, just the swift consequence of a hidden measure Carter had drafted months before. "Order in the court," Carter said, lifting his gavel with deliberate calm. The soft rap against polished wood resonated like a heartbeat. "We'll reconvene in 10 minutes. All parties remain in place." Sunlight slanted through tall arched windows, gilding the marble floor and warming the dark oak benches. Spectators, local reporters, a handful of residents, the boy's mother, sat in stunned silence, absorbing both the violence and the immediate reckoning that followed. Carter lowered himself back into his seat, touching the faint red mark on his face with the gentlest of brushes. He'd spent decades here, believing that justice was more than statutes. It was the guardrail society erected for the vulnerable. Tonight, he would prove it. Across from him, Jalen Ford, 16 years old, accused of obstructing an officer, sat hunched at defense counsel's table. His oversized shirt swallowed him, but his eyes were fixed on Carter. In that glance, the judge saw something he'd only ever hoped to inspire: belief that the law could protect even the smallest among them. Rowan slumped back, confusion and fear flitting across his features. He had intended to humiliate the judge, to show contempt for the man he assumed was powerless. Instead, he had unwittingly triggered the Justice Shield Clause, an emergency provision Carter had embedded in the state's public safety fund. As chairman of the Public Safety Endowment Board, Carter controlled nearly $3 billion earmarked for policing grants. Clause 103B stipulated that any sworn officer who commits violence against a sitting judge would prompt an automatic 72-hour freeze on their precinct's entire funding. Carter studied Rowan's face as the officer's radio crackled again, this time with a muted confirmation. The freeze was in effect. Badge deactivated. Funds locked. Rowan's shoulders slumped under the weight of instant accountability. In the gallery, Tanya Ford gripped a small candle, its flame flickering with resolve. A handful of supporters stood behind her, their candles casting a soft glow on signs reading "No More Silence" and "Justice Can't Be Struck Down." It was an unplanned vigil, citizens drawn by what they had witnessed and motivated by Carter's own invitation to engage. Outside the oak doors, the local news vans hummed to life. Anchors replayed the slap in slow motion, overlaying it with Carter's question and the freeze notification. Headlines blared, "Cop slaps judge. Precinct 9 budget frozen $325 million." Inside, Carter tapped a note into his courtroom record. He heard the murmur of gossip, wingtip shoes tapping, rustle of paper, the swelling tides of public will. He felt no triumph. This was not a personal victory. It was a demonstration that power, once abused, could be countered by law itself. He looked at Jalen. "Young man," he said, voice gentle, "your case will continue under these new circumstances. You too deserve the system's full protection." Jalen nodded, hope shining through hesitation. In that moment, the judge's purpose was clear. to show that justice is not a passive shield, but an active force, ready to defend itself and those who rely on it. When the gavel struck again, Carter closed his eyes briefly, breathing in the hush. The chamber was his stage and his sanctuary, but now it was also the launch pad for systemic change. He knew storms lay ahead, hearings, investigations, public debates, but he stood ready, unwavering. Because sometimes, the most powerful reaction comes not from raised voices or clenched fists, but from the calm resolve of someone who refuses to flinch, no matter how hard the world strikes back. The bailiff's voice cuts through the silence. "All rise." Judge Carter doesn't move. He remains standing behind the bench, robes falling in perfect, unruffled folds. Officer Rowan sits in the witness chair, cuffed now, shoulders slumped as if the weight of the world rests on him. The courtroom, for its part, has forgotten how to breathe. On the bench, Carter surveys the faces before him. The stenographer frozen mid-keystroke, the defense attorney brushing a loose curl from Jalen's forehead, the prosecutor's lips set in a straight line. In the gallery, Tanya Ford's eyes glisten, but she holds her tears at bay. Reporters exchange glances over their microphones. Every phone camera trained on this moment records Carter's silent power more loudly than any pronouncement could. He lets it stretch. This pregnant pause where a single look carries more force than 1,000 gavel strikes. Rowan meets that look, but there's no triumph in his eyes. Only confusion and the creeping dread of someone who realizes he's fallen into his own trap. Finally, Carter leans forward and taps the gavel once. It's soft but deliberate, like a calm heartbeat in a gale. "This court reconvenes," he says, voice even, composed. "Officer Rowan, please stand." Rowan rises, hands still secured at his back. His knuckles whiten on the metal links. Carter tilts his head slightly and fixes him with that same unblinking gaze. The officer's uniform looks suddenly ridiculous. Ornamented authority rendered powerless in the face of calm resolve. "Your actions tonight were witnessed by every viewer of CourtCam," Carter continues, "and by every person in this room." He gestures broadly, encompassing the jurors, the press, the onlookers. "Violence against the symbol of justice demands transparency." He nods to the clerk. "Publish the freeze order and badge deactivation on the public docket." A clerk by the door taps at a tablet. On the courtroom's screens, "Freeze order executed. Precinct 9, $325,000 scrolls into view." The icon representing Rowan's badge goes dark. A collective gasp ripples through the crowd. Carter allows the murmur to build for a moment, then raises a single finger. Silence returns, heavy as fog. "Proceed with testimony," he commands. As the prosecutor stands, Carter retracts slightly behind the bench, hands resting on polished wood. He watches Rowan shift his weight, eyes darting among the gallery and the screens. The judge's pulse is a steady thrum in his temples, but his face remains a mask of impartiality. Inside, a storm of thoughts rages. The memory of drafting the Justice Shield clause in a midnight board meeting. The careful language ensuring immediate action. The conviction that justice must wield power when rights are assaulted. He feels the tightening of resolve, the lesson learned in every case he's presided over. Sometimes silence is the sharpest weapon. Rowan clears his throat. I was responding to a perceived threat," he stammers. Carter leans forward. "You identified threat in a glance. Then you struck the court's highest authority." He pauses, letting the incongruity of that statement sink in. "Tell me, Officer Rowan, what do you believe you are protecting?" Rowan falters. His voice is low. "Order, law and order." "Order," Carter repeats softly. "But whose order?" He's not shouting. It's too late for noise. This is about dismantling assumptions. "You struck me because I wear a robe. You believed I was undeserving, yet you stand in that robe's presence now, powerless." He points at Rowan's deactivated badge on the screen. "That badge did not protect you. It protected your funds, now frozen, your privileges. now revoked. Rowan's jaw tightens. Carter recognizes the fear of losing status, the fear of accountability. He tilts his head as if listening for Rowan's next words. When none come, Carter straightens. He turns to the gallery. "Miss Ford," he says, beckoning Tanya forward. Her knees tremble as she stands. "You requested the surveillance footage." She nods. "Yes, Your Honor. I need to see what happened to my son." Carter offers a slight smile. "In time. First, we will hear from Officer Rowan. Then we will review every piece of evidence. Footage, reports, complaints." He taps the bench in a gesture that seems both gentle and inexorable. No more corners of this case left in darkness. Tanya's eyes fill with relief and something like hope. She returns to her seat, clutching Jalen's hand. Jalen meets Carter's gaze for a moment. His eyes are wide but resolute, as though he senses that, for once, the law is on his side. When the prosecutor calls the next witness, Carter steps back, letting the formal proceedings resume. Yet he doesn't sit. Instead, he stands in silhouette against the tall windows as afternoon light fades to dusk. His figure is still, unwavering, a sentinel at the edge of a gathering storm. Inside his mind, he traces the patterns behind Clause 103B, statistics showing precincts where unchecked force had gone unpunished, letters from victims whose lives were upended, the quiet knowledge that power shields itself. He feels the weight of obligation to every face in this room, to every viewer who pledged, "I'm watching from Houston, Atlanta, Chicago." They're no longer passive spectators. They're witnesses and participants in the restructuring of justice. The sergeant of bailiffs taps at Rowan's shoulder. "Court demands you answer the question, officer." Rowan swallows. He glances at Carter, then at his own shaking hands. The judge's gaze narrows, patient but insistent. Rowan inhales and speaks. "I believe I'm protecting the public." Carter inclines his head. "Very well." He steps aside, allowing the testimony to unfold. But as Rowan recounts his side of the story, Carter's presence looms, a silent reminder that every word, every claim of public safety, is now under the scrutiny of a system that refuses to tolerate violence without consequence. Outside the courtroom, a few candles flicker beneath a hastily scrawled sign. "Justice can't be struck down." In that quiet vigil, community members stand shoulder to shoulder, their faces lit by candlelight and conviction. Carter knows they came because they believed in possibility, because someone had dared to ask them to speak up. Inside, he listens to Rowan's testimony with unwavering focus. Each admission, each hesitation, tightens the net around the officer's excuses. Carter's heart beats steadily, not with triumph, but with a solemn reverence for the process. This is the true power of justice, not the gavel's strike, but the patience to let the system's full weight fall where it must. As the hour grows late, the judge finally calls for a recess. He allows himself a moment to sit, running a hand over his cheek, touching the bruise, but also touching the proof that justice can protect itself. He stands again, voice quiet but firm. "We will continue at 9 tomorrow morning. All evidence will be available for public review." Rowan looks up, a flicker of defiance returning to his eyes. Carter meets it without flinching. He nods once, then steps down from the bench, moving through the maze of reporters and allies. A man whose silence has spoken louder than any verdict ever could. Because sometimes, the most powerful message in a courtroom isn't delivered with words. It's delivered with the unwavering resolve to stand firm, to let every person who watched know that justice endures, even in the face of a blow meant to silence it. The hallway lights are dim by the time Benjamin Carter drags his robe off and hangs it on the brass hook behind his chamber's door. The echo of the day's tension still hums in his ears, the sharp crack of Rowan's slap, the stunned hush, the surge of live-stream view counts, the radio buzz announcing $325 million frozen in midair. Now, alone, he lets himself feel the weight of it all. He sinks into the leather armchair behind his desk, the same chair he sat in for more than 20 years. Its arms are worn, smooth in places where his elbows have rested, creased where he's leant forward to hear victims' pleas or scold a prosecutor into clarity. Tonight, the chair feels narrower, as if it's squeezing him under the pressure of a secret he's carried since drafting Clause 103B. Benjamin reaches into his breast pocket and pulls out a folded scrap of paper. The corners are dog-eared, the ink smudged from years of folding and unfolding. It's the note his wife slipped him on the night he was sworn in. Let justice speak when you cannot. He brings it close to his heart, chest rising and falling with a catch of memory. He remembers the day he decided to become a judge. He was 26, fresh out of law school, working as a public defender in a cramped office downtown. His first client was a 19-year-old kid named Marcus, charged with theft. Marcus stole a candy bar because his little sister was hungry. The prosecutor, a man Benjamin had once admired, ripped Marcus's family to shreds on the stand. "You can't excuse criminal behavior with poverty," he'd thundered. Marcus's mother had wept so hard he had to guide her from the courtroom. That night, Benjamin sat alone at his desk, papers strewn everywhere, and he realized something. The law, when wielded without compassion, becomes an instrument of cruelty. If he wanted real change, he couldn't just defend one client at a time. He had to shape the system itself. He would become a judge, a beacon, where mercy and fairness could balance the scales. He closes his eyes against the memory. In the silence, he can almost hear Marcus's father whispering, "Thank you for listening." That voice, so fragile and raw, had set him on this path. He had vowed never to let the courtroom silence drown out the human heart. His desk lamp casts a warm pool of light across open notebooks and case files. He picks up a file marked Internal Complaints, Brantley Unit. Flips to a page dated 2 years ago. A mother's letter detailing how Officer Rowan's precinct had misused force in her neighborhood. The letter was ignored, filed under Resolved Internally. He had read it late that night, brows furrowed. He remembered that moment of anger, the sense that he was watching history repeat itself. Young black faces bruised, dignity stripped away, while the system yawned and turned away. That's why he drafted the Justice Shield Clause. Not out of vengeance, but out of obligation. A soft knock echoes at his door. He tucks the Marcus file under a stack and rises to open it. His clerk, a woman named Teresa, stands there, hands folded respectfully. She holds 2 steaming cups of coffee. "For you," she says quietly, handing him the mug. "It's been a long day." Benjamin offers a tired smile. Teresa has been with him since his earliest days on the bench. She remembers the long nights he spent poring over juvenile cases, the way he insisted on reading every letter from inmates, every victim's statement. She knows his heart more deeply than most. "Thank you," he murmurs, accepting the cup. He takes a cautious sip, the bitter warmth grounding him. Teresa hesitates. "You did what you had to do today. They'll understand." He nods slowly. "I hope so." He closes his eyes again and inhales. "I didn't want to reveal Clause 103B so soon, but sometimes the system needs a jolt." She steps forward. "You gave them more than a jolt, Judge. You showed them that justice can fight back." He looks at her, and the weight on his shoulders shifts, just a fraction lighter. He turns back to his desk. "Lock the door," he says, setting down his coffee. "And bring me the surveillance footage from the hallway, every angle." Teresa nods and slips out. Benjamin turns to the surveillance request form he's already typed up. His fingers hover for a moment, and he thinks of Tanya Ford, Jalen's mother, who stood silently in the gallery, candlelight in hand. He remembers the fierce hope in her eyes when he promised transparency. He owes her that footage, not just so she can see what happened to her son, but so the world sees that transparency is more than a buzzword. He runs a hand over his cheek, feeling the tightness where Rowan's palm struck him. The red mark has already begun to bruise. He tastes metal at the back of his throat. Surprise, indignation, sorrow, but above all, a resolute calm. This isn't about a personal vendetta. It's about proving that the law can protect those who serve it as well as those it serves. He settles back into his chair. In the lamp's glow, he retrieves a leather-bound journal. On a fresh page, he writes in his precise script, Clause 103B activated 3/25/25. Precinct 9 freeze initiated. Continue full review of complaints. No corner of this case left unexamined. He closes the journal and looks out the window. The sun has set. The courthouse columns stand bathed in orange streetlight. In the square below, he can barely make out a small group holding signs and candles. Neighbors who walked from their homes to stand for justice. He thinks of their quiet vigil, the way their silhouettes swayed in the darkness like beacons. He stands and approaches the window. The world beyond feels vast and noisy. Social feeds ablaze. Pundits parsing every second of the slap. City officials scrambling to respond. But in this moment, he feels a profound stillness, a sense of purpose rooted deeper than all the noise. He whispers to himself, "Let justice speak when we cannot." And in that whispered vow, he finds renewed strength for the battles yet to come. For tomorrow, the hearing resumes at 9 sharp. Testimony, evidence, the slow unspooling of truth. Tonight, however, he allows himself one rare moment of peace. A judge alone in his chambers, fortified by memory and driven by the unwavering belief that the law must always protect those who need it most. Judge Carter clears his throat and lifts his gavel for the second recess tap. He remains standing behind the bench, robes falling in neat folds. The hush that followed Rowan's confession still lingers like fog, but Carter's next words slice through it with unmistakable purpose. "Clerk," he says, voice steady. "Activate court cam on the public feed. All angles, bench, witness stand, gallery, go live on the county website immediately." A ripple of surprise passes through the courtroom. The deputy clerk, a young man named Morales, glances at Carter with wide eyes, then darts for the control panel behind the bench. Teresa, Carter's longtime secretary, rises and hurries past the jury box to flick switches that hadn't seen daylight since the system was installed 6 years ago. The low hum of electronics kicks in, and a bank of monitors behind the bench flickers from blank blue to a kaleidoscope of camera feeds. Close-ups of Carter's gavel, the witness chair, the spectator benches, even the hallway outside the courtroom doors. Carter watches it all without a flinch, his presence calm and commanding. He turns to Morales. "Make sure that the live stream link is pinned at the top of the Smithfield County website. Post an advisory. Live coverage of today's proceedings. Transparency in action. Notify the press desk." Morales nods, fingers flying across a touchscreen. Teresa steps up to a desktop at the back of the bench, opens a browser, and types a succinct message. "Court cam feed now public. smithfieldcounty.gov/live. Transparency starts now." She hits post, and a notification chime rings softly through the courtroom's hidden speakers. Within seconds, a red banner appears across the live feed. "Live on court cam. smithfieldcounty.gov/live." A small QR code blinks in the corner of the monitors for anyone in the gallery to scan. Several reporters pull out phones, scanning the code, testing the link. Word spreads in hushed whispers. The world is watching every angle of this trial. Carter allows a beat for the weight of that reality to sink in. Every flicker of expression on Rowan's face, the confusion, the fear, is now out there for anyone with internet access to see. He doesn't smile, but a subtle spark of resolve glints in his eyes. He steps down off the dais and approaches the rail before the gallery. The wooden barrier glints under the overhead lights. Carter leans on it, looking directly at the onlookers, the press, and through their lenses, the nation. "Today," he says, voice firm, "this courtroom is no longer a closed chamber. We are open to scrutiny, because justice thrives under the public eye. and those who wield authority must answer to the people. A ripple of applause, quiet, respectful, rises from the gallery. Row after row of spectators, some elderly with hands folded in laps, some younger court staff, nod in agreement. Even the deputy marshals in their crisp uniforms relax their stances, as if recognizing they too are participants in this broader social contract. Back at the bench, Morales brings up a multi-camera display on the central screen. The feed shows the perimeter of the witness box, the defense table, the jury box, and the audience seats. Carter watches the shifting views for a moment, memorizing the angles as though he's mapping out his strategy. Every camera is a sentinel, ensuring no corner of the process remains in shadows. He turns to Teresa. Schedule the hallway cameras to record 24/7. We'll review the footage for any moments before and after the assault that offer context. She jots it down on a pad. Make sure Tanya Ford gets full access, Carter adds, thinking of the grieving mother whose son is on trial. She requested the hallway footage. Extend her credentials. Teresa looks up. Understood, Your Honor. Carter nods. He returns to the bench and raises his gavel once more. Proceed with the afternoon session. Officer Rowan, you may continue your testimony under live public scrutiny. Rowan stands, shoulders stiff. He glances at the screens showing his own reflection from every conceivable angle. The reality of exposure adds a new layer of pressure. His uniform feels heavier, his deactivated badge icon still lingering in his peripheral vision. He takes a breath and faces Carter. Very well, he says, voice tight. I understand. The prosecutor jumps up to reintroduce the line of questioning. Carter steps back, folding his hands on the bench. He watches as Rowan begins to speak, this time knowing every word is caught on multiple feeds. The officer's retelling of events is cautious, halting, no longer the brisk, confident recitation from before. Carter observes the subtle shifts. Rowan's throat clearing, the beads of sweat at his hairline, the way his eyes flick toward the back door. As the testimony unfolds under public gaze, Carter feels a quiet satisfaction. He sees the power of transparency at work, decorum restored, prejudices exposed, promises of accountability broadcast in real time. In the small square of the live stream chat, comments flood in. Watching from Seattle, finally real justice. Courtroom must be heard, not hidden. Kudos to Judge Carter, changing the game. Carter allows himself a moment to meet the camera, a steady smile at the end of the bench. He doesn't speak aloud. Instead, he offers a look that says, "We're in this together." The proceedings continue. Cross-examinations, objections, the rustle of paper as defense counsel shuffles through exhibits. But Carter never loses sight of the larger picture. Each question he asks, each instruction he issues, serves not only the letter of the law, but the collective will of every viewer who scanned that QR code. Midway through the session, Carter notices a new notification pop up on the control monitor. Live viewer count, 128,452 and rising. He allows a brief nod in Morales' direction, as though to say, keep going. Morales acknowledges with a tight smile, pleased, energized. At one point, Carter invites Jalen's mother, Tanya, forward to the bench. She hesitates, then steps across the rail, guided by a bailiff. Carter gestures to a side screen. Ms. Ford, feel free to watch the feed. You have a right to every angle we have. She approaches, awe and relief mingling on her face as she scans footage showing her son's initial arrest outside the courtroom doors. Carter watches her emotions flicker, pain, then a glimmer of justice unfolding. His heart tightens at the sight, but he maintains his composure, knowing that public validation is often the balm victims need. The testimony wraps up with a final objection by the defense. Carter rules swiftly, his voice echoing, "Sustained. We will reserve final judgment until all evidence, including the hallway footage, has been fully examined." He taps the gavel again, 3 times this time, and directs the bailiff to take the witness down. As the witnesses shuffle out, Carter takes a breath and addresses the courtroom. This trial will continue tomorrow at 9 a.m. I encourage any member of the public to review the live stream archives. Transparency is the cornerstone of our justice." He glances at the bank of monitors one last time. The feed shows empty chairs, fading tracings of footsteps on polished floors. Carter imagines those hallways lit by cameras. No action hidden, no moment unaccounted for. It's a promise he's kept, and a promise he will uphold throughout this trial. He steps down from the bench and walks toward the back of the courtroom, nodding to attendees paused at their seats. The scene is striking. A judge among his community, united by the simple conviction that justice, once struck, must strike back with clarity. Outside the courthouse doors, cameras continue to broadcast, microphones still poised. Carter's final act of the day is not a dramatic pronouncement, but a quiet walk among the people he serves. Murmurs of approval follow him down the aisle. As he reaches the foyer, he pauses by the live stream terminal, scans the live viewer count, now over 150,000, and allows himself a satisfied exhale. He steps out into the gathering dusk, courthouse lights glowing behind him. In the crisp evening air, Carter feels the weight of history and the lightness of fulfilled duty. He's opened the doors of justice so wide that no blind corner remains, and tomorrow, they'll step through together. Every citizen as witness, every camera as ally, until every truth is laid bare. Judge Carter stepped into his chambers just after dawn, only to find his inbox overflowing. 3 dozen emails from the press desk, notifications from the courthouse web team, and an urgent memo from IT all waited for him on his polished oak desk. He dropped his briefcase with a soft thud and sank into his chair, scanning the headlines. Viral court cam slap, 45,000 shares in 4 hours. Justice Shield Clause activated. Precedent or overreach. Judge Carter versus Officer Rowan, national reckoning. He clicked open the first memo. The digital analytics dashboard glowed on his screen. 45,000 shares on the county live stream. 275,000 unique views. Comments flooding in at a rate of 10,000 per hour. The hashtag Justice Shield had exploded across Twitter and Facebook. Even before his first cup of coffee, the entire country was watching. Carter leaned back, fingertips pressed together in the familiar steeple pose. He felt the weight of every view count, every retweet, like a physical pressure on his chest. He'd anticipated public interest, of course. Any assault on a sitting judge was newsworthy, but he hadn't expected the velocity. The velocity felt like a freight train bearing down on him. Teresa, his longtime secretary, poked her head in. "Morning, Your Honor. Press desk called. You've got live hits from New York, LA, Atlanta. Plus a cable network wants an exclusive interview." He nodded once, absently. "Set it up for tomorrow afternoon. No earlier. I don't want any appearance that I'm pursuing publicity." She clicked her pen, making a note. "Understood." He took a slow sip of his coffee, bitter, grounding, and watched as the numbers inched higher. In the margin of the dashboard, someone had scrawled, "Trending, #Justice Shield #Smithfield slap #public eye." It was surreal to see his own courtroom transformed into a digital amphitheater. Every angle broadcast for judgment, not just by jurors, but by millions of strangers. A soft knock. Morales, the deputy clerk, slipped in. "Your Honor, the state's communications office wants to issue a press release on the fund freeze and badge deactivation. They're drafting language right now." Carter rubbed his temples. "Hold off. Let's craft it ourselves. I don't want spin doctors twisting the narrative. I want facts, plain and simple." Morales nodded. "Yes, sir. I'll tell them to stand by." Carter leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. He stared at the gavel's reflection in the monitor's dark bezel. In 4 hours, what began as a simple live feed had morphed into a national debate about police authority, judicial integrity, and the power of silent statutes. He'd pinned everything on the Justice Shield Clause 6 months ago, convinced it was a necessary safeguard. But he'd never tested it on himself. Never had he envisaged such a tempest. He opened a blank entry in his journal and wrote, Public scrutiny proves the need for transparency, but let's not let the storm drown out due process. He felt the edges of unease creeping in. The courtroom had to remain a place of calm deliberation, not a spectacle. His instructions for full live stream coverage were meant to shine light into corners, but now that light threatened to blind him. At 9 o'clock, he rose and walked down the hallway to the courtroom, flanked by the faint hum of security cameras. Reporters clustered by the doors, microphones extended like curious tentacles. "Judge Carter!" shouted one. "How do you respond to calls for Rowan's immediate arrest?" Another cried. "Is this a watershed moment for policing reform?" Carter offered only a small nod and a measured smile. "Court is now in session," he called, voice even. He entered the room, robes flowing behind him. Cameras clicked. The gallery fell silent. He took his seat, cleared his throat, and tapped the gavel twice. "This afternoon's session will proceed under public live stream. We will continue with the cross-examination of Officer Rowan." Rowan stepped up, uniform impeccable, but posture defeated, eyes flicking to the monitors overhead displaying the shared live stream. Carter saw the officer swallow hard. The badge icon on the screen beside Rowan was dark, a stark reminder of the frozen funds and revoked privileges. As the prosecutor resumed questioning, Carter studied the gallery. A handful of community members who'd gathered for a candlelight vigil outside had slipped in, holding signs reading, "Justice can't be struck down," and "No more silence." Their presence lent a hush of solidarity to the proceedings. He met their eyes briefly, offering a subtle nod of acknowledgement. But back on the screen, the live chat feed hadn't slowed. Messages scrolled in faster now. "Watching from Cleveland, Judge Carter for Supreme Court." This is the real checks and balances. Do we get to save the footage for history class? Carter felt a twist of anxiety. Would his every gesture be parsed, his every word disemboweled by pundits? He reminded himself to stay present, focus on the witness, the evidence, the law, not on the spectacle. A colleague of his, one of the court's public information officers, appeared at the back and slipped him a note. "National Evening News wants footage. They'll pay for expedited access." Carter rifled through the note, then tore it up and waved Teresa over. "Do not send any recordings. We keep control of the archives until the final verdict." Teresa bowed her head. "Yes, Your Honor." He returned to the bench and caught Rowan mid-answer. "And yes, I followed procedure as I was trained." Carter leaned forward. "Officer Rowan, please clarify. When you followed procedure, did that include recognizing the authority of this court?" His tone was calm, but the question rang like a challenge. Would procedure ever justify striking a judge in the face? Rowan's face flickered. Carter sensed how the public eye had turned the witness stand into a pressure chamber. Rowan swallowed and replied, "No, Your Honor, I made a mistake." A murmur went through the courtroom, half relief, half disbelief. Carter allowed that moment to stretch, reminding everyone that accountability was more than procedural nicety. It was human. Over the next hour, the media maelstrom forced itself into every facet of the trial. Carter saw a live local anchor's reflection in the courtroom's polished floor, her chyron reading, "Breaking Judge Orders Full Transparency." He heard the scribble of reporters' notebooks, the faint taps of tablet keyboards, the occasional phone camera flash. Yet despite the whirlpool of attention, Carter maintained his serenity. He called witnesses, reviewed exhibits, ruled on objections, all while bearing the silent surveillance of tens of thousands online viewers. The strain was real, but so was his conviction that exposing the process would strengthen, not weaken, public trust. As the session neared its close, he issued his final directive. "Clerk, please post the initial witness transcripts online by tomorrow morning. Let everyone see exactly what's been said." When the gavel fell for adjournment, Carter stood and extended a courtesy nod toward the gallery. He then stepped carefully through the press throng without comment, heading back to his chambers. Once inside, he exhaled a long, low breath and collapsed into his chair. The echoes of today's proceedings still reverberated in his mind. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "Transparency is a double-edged sword, but it's the only blade worth wielding." He reached for his journal again and added a footnote to this day's entry. "Metrics rise, pressure mounts, but let the system shine. Tomorrow, we dig deeper." Outside, the sun dipped low, and the courthouse columns cast long, watchful shadows. Inside, Judge Carter prepared for another night of reflection, readying himself to shoulder the glare of public scrutiny, determined that no force, not even a viral slap, would eclipse the true purpose of justice. The morning sun was just cresting the rooftops of Smithfield's Courthouse Square when Judge Carter slipped into the main lobby. He'd received the summons late last night, an emergency press briefing called by the county commission. By 9 a.m., the entire local media corps would pack this marble-floored hall. He paused in the doorway, hands folded behind his back, and surveyed the scene. Reporters clustered around two podiums draped in the county seal. Cameramen jockeyed for position. On one side, County Chairwoman Elena Mitchell, sharp suit, sharper gaze, flanked Police Chief Donovan Webb, whose crisp dress uniform looked suddenly out of place under the glare of camera lights. Carter stayed back in the shadows, listening as Mitchell stepped forward. Her voice was calm, but her eyes flicked toward Webb with the precision of a general. "Today," she began, "we face an undeniable truth. The actions of Officer Mark Rowan have shaken public trust not only in our police force, but in the very idea of public safety. In response, the County Commission is suspending $2.3 million in funding for bias awareness and procedural training in Precinct 9, effective immediately." A murmur rippled through the gathered reporters. Chief Webb's jaw tightened. Carter watched Webb's uniformed shoulders stiffen. Every officer in the room knew precisely what losing that budget meant. No new body cams, no updated de-escalation workshops, no community outreach programs for months to come. Mitchell raised a hand to forestall questions. "This is not a rollback of our commitment to fair policing," she insisted. "It is a necessary pause to review curriculum, faculty, and accountability measures. We will reconvene a special subcommittee within 2 weeks to restore funding, contingent on meaningful reforms." The reporters bombarded them with questions. Carter heard one loud crackle from a nearby mic. "Chairwoman Mitchell, do you fear this cut will leave officers unprepared?" Webb's lips twitched as though he wanted to answer, but Mitchell answered for him. "Training must earn trust. We will not fund programs that can't guarantee genuine change." Carter's chest tightened. On one hand, he understood the political calculus: show decisive action, appease public outrage, and signal that the county would not waver. On the other, he knew those training dollars saved lives, built bridges, and lay the groundwork for officers to see community members as human beings rather than threats. Shot welled in his chest. He felt the pulse of every officer who cared, every program coordinator who'd poured their heart into de-escalation modules. He shifted his weight, stepping forward so his long shadow fell across the tile. Neither Mitchell nor Webb had invited him to the podium, but Carter had chosen to attend unannounced. This was his courtroom, his community, and he refused to be a silent bystander. A reporter spotted him. "Judge Carter!" Cameras turned. Mitchell's eyes narrowed. She hadn't expected his presence. Webb's face flushed. Carter lifted a hand, forestalling the sea of questions. "I applaud the county commission's intention to demand accountability," he said, voice carrying easily through the lobby's high arches. "But cutting bias awareness funding without a clear path forward risks silencing the very officers who want to learn and grow. We need to strengthen, not suspend, these programs, while we scrutinize their effectiveness." He paused, letting the words land. Reporters adjusted their microphones. Webb opened his mouth but thought better of interrupting. Mitchell tilted her head, appraising him. Carter continued, "I stand here as someone who's seen what happens when training fails. I've reviewed internal complaints from Precinct 9, dozens of letters from citizens who felt unheard, unprotected. If we deny them the tools to change, we leave no remedy for mistakes born of ignorance. Instead, we widen the gap between law enforcement and the community." Webb swallowed. Carter's measured calm held more authority than Mitchell's polished statement. In that moment, the power dynamic shifted. Not a judge in his courtroom, but a judge addressing a crisis in the public square. Mitchell stepped forward again. "Your Honor, your point is well taken. We will adjust our approach. The $2.3 million will be reallocated to an independent oversight committee charged with auditing existing programs. We will begin new training only after that audit confirms meaningful curriculum changes." Carter nodded slowly. "That's progress," he answered, feeling a spark of relief slide through him. "But let's set a deadline, 30 days, and allow community representatives, including those harmed by misconduct, to take seats on that committee. Otherwise, we risk another cycle of promises unmet." She glanced at Webb, who cleared his throat. "We'll include civilian liaisons," he said, "and I'll personally oversee the audit process." Carter let them speak, then stepped back, recognizing that the public drama had reached a constructive pause. Reporters scribbled notes furiously. A few nodded in approval, sensing that true change might emerge from this exchange. As cameras panned away, Carter retreated down the marble corridor to the hallway outside his chambers. He leaned against the cool stone wall, exhaling a slow breath. No mingled with resolve in his mind. Anger that systemic failures prompted this emergency measure, but determination that the outcome be more than symbolic. Moments later, Teresa and Morales joined him. Carter turned to them. "We'll need to draft an order for the committee's formation by this afternoon. Names, scope, timeline, and send a copy of today's statement to every precinct commander." Teresa jotted notes. Morales nodded. Carter inhaled again, steeling himself. "Also," he added quietly, "reach out to Tanya Ford. Let her know she can propose community members for that oversight panel. Make sure she has a voice at the table." Teresa's eyes shone with empathy. "I'll call her now." Carter closed his eyes briefly, picturing Tanya's relieved face when she heard the news. He thought of Jalan in the gallery, of every citizen who believed in the promise of the law. His anger softened into purpose. He straightened, smoothing his robes. "This is more than politics. It's our duty." His voice was low but firm, an echo of his courtroom cadence. "Let's make sure it stays that way." As they walked back into the lobby, reporters caught sight of him again, but this time their questions were less frantic, more thoughtful. Carter answered a few brief inquiries about civilian participation and tight deadlines, then excused himself. He paced toward the courthouse steps, the morning sun warming his back. In the square below, a small group of community members held their vigil, a cluster of candles and handwritten signs. Carter paused to watch them, ordinary people claiming their stake in justice's repair. He lifted a hand in silent salute, then turned and strode up the steps, ready to return to his chambers and begin the work of translating today's promises into tomorrow's reforms. Because in Smithfield County, justice couldn't afford a half measure, and Judge Benjamin Carter would make sure it never did. Judge Carter settled behind the bench with the ease of a man who's done this 1,000 times. Yet tonight, every fiber of his being hummed with anticipation. The gallery was wrapped silent, each spectator leaning forward as if afraid to miss what came next. Cameras whirred softly, the red live dot blinking on screens around the room and across the world. He surveyed the faces before him, reporters with pens poised, jurors in crisp business attire, a handful of community members clutching candles from last night's vigil. And there, across from him, Officer Rowan sat unevenly in the witness chair, eyes darting nervously to the bank of monitors showing each camera angle. A constant reminder that every twitch, every stammer would be broadcast. Carter cleared his throat, not from uncertainty, but to punctuate what he was about to say. He raised his gavel slightly, then set it down again with deliberate slowness. The room held its collective breath. "This," he began, voice rich and calm, "is an assault on justice itself." The words fell like stones dropped into water, ripples spreading through the courtroom's hush. Carter paused, let the phrase echo. "No," he continued. "Not just against me, but against the principle this robe represents. When a sworn officer strikes the embodiment of our law, it's not a personal affront. It's a strike at every person who believes the law should protect the vulnerable." He let his gaze travel over the silent rows, fixing briefly on the twitch of Rowan's jaw, the quiver in Ms. Ford's hand as she gripped her candle, the glint of tears in Jalen's eyes. Then he turned to the clerk beside him. "Clerk," Carter said, voice measured. "Activate Clause 103B. The clerk, pale-faced but steady, tapped a sequence on a touchscreen embedded in the bench. A moment later, the courtroom's monitors flickered. A bold red banner swept across each feed. Precinct 9 funds frozen, $325,000. Simultaneously, a small badge icon next to Rowan's name on the digital witness board dimmed to gray. Badge deactivated. The text lingered on screens for several heartbeats before receding to a steady ticker at the bottom. A murmur rose, low, incredulous, building. Reporters exchanged glances, whispering into their microphones. Rowan looked as though the ground had dropped away beneath him. His uniform, once a symbol of unchallengeable authority, now hung on him like a shroud of powerlessness. Carter watched all of it without so much as a twitch of expression. Inside, a quiet surge of triumph simmered. He had known Clause 103B would be his scalpel, but activating it on the bench, on himself, was a move he dreamed of only in theory. He felt that familiar thrill of justice balanced by restraint. The clause was never about spectacle, but about system. And in this very moment, the system had spoken. He allowed the room a beat to absorb the full weight of what had happened. Then he raised the gavel and tapped once, softly, but the sound rang like a verdict. "Order," he intoned. "Order in the court." The bailiff straightened, the gallery stilled, and the live stream chat exploded with locations and comments. "Watching from Seattle, this is revolutionary. He just froze 325 members live on air. That's how you defend justice." Yet Carter didn't offer a smile. Instead, he looked across at Rowan, eyes cool as steel. "Officer Rowan, your actions tonight have consequences beyond any single hearing. You will remain in custody until further order of the court." Rowan's shoulders slumped. He managed a strained nod, an acknowledgement that the ground had irrevocably shifted. Carter's calm resolve had stripped him of every shield. No badge, no budget, no presumption of inviolability. Turning, Carter addressed the courtroom. "We will reconvene in 1 hour. When we return, we will review every piece of evidence, the surveillance footage, internal complaint files, community statements, under the same public scrutiny." His tone was firm but fair. This was not vengeance. It was accountability. He let that statement hang in the air, then retreated behind the bench to gather his notes. In the hush, he felt the collective heartbeat of justice, fast, relieved, empowered. He had given voice to Clause 103B, and in doing so, had transformed a personal insult into a systemic reckoning. As he scribbled a reminder to request the full set of hallway and corridor footage, Teresa, his secretary, leaned in and whispered, "That went off without a hitch, sir." Carter nodded, eyes on the red banner still scrolling on the monitor. "So it did," he replied quietly, voice edged with satisfaction. "So it did." In the gallery, Tanya Ford clasped her hands to her chest. Jalen let out a slow breath, shoulders relaxing. Even the jurors, stiff behind their notebooks, exchanged relieved glances. Carter knew they weren't celebrating the slap. It was the system's response they applauded. Stepping back, he looked down at Rowan, now silent and still. The officer's face was a portrait of disbelief. The same disbelief Carter once saw in victims who realized at last that the law could fight back. Then, gently, Carter called out, "Bailiff, you may remove Officer Rowan's restraints for the recess." Display him at the holding cell window so the public sees due process in action. The bailiff nodded and approached Rowan, carefully uncuffing his hands and motioning him toward the side door. Rowan stumbled to his feet, pausing to look back at Carter. The judge offered him no wrath, only unyielding resolve. "Proceed," Carter said, returning to his notes, already planning the next phase of the trial. Rowan shuffled away, and Carter turned to the clerk. "Ensure that all precinct commanders receive notification of today's order, and notify the State Oversight Commission that we have activated Clause 103B under Judicial Directive 47. The clerk typed rapidly. Carter took a breath, letting the calm settle around him once more. He felt a deep satisfaction, not in personal victory, but in knowing the law, his law, had upheld its own sanctity. As the cameras resumed their low hum and the room began to stir with whispered conversations, Carter allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. The clause had done its work. The system had spoken, and justice, for once, had been given the final word. Judge Carter doesn't sleep the night he orders the internal review. Instead, he remains in his chambers long after the hallway lights have dimmed, the courthouse eerily quiet except for the soft click of his lamp switch. On his desk sits a stack of folder after folder, 213 individual complaints filed against Precinct 9 over the last 8 years, each one marked "resolved internally." He pours a fresh cup of coffee, still dark and hot, and pushes the folders toward him. His gavel, polished to a soft gleam, sits off to the side, almost forgotten. He flips open the first file, a letter dated March 2019, from a young mother whose son was detained for loitering late at night. She writes, in shaky script, how the officers pressed the boy's face into the curb, ignored his pleas of innocence, and left him with bruises on his wrists, an apology never offered. Carter's chest tightens. He brushes a hand to his temple. This wasn't justice, he thinks. It was something darker. Casual brutality hidden behind fine print and stamped "closed." He moves on to the next folder, an internal memo noting a use of force on a college student who refused to remove headphones during a routine traffic stop. The student later told his parents the handcuffs cut so deeply into his skin he couldn't feel his fingers for days. The memo's conclusion: no policy violations. A slow anger rises in Carter's gut, burning, relentless. He glances at the clock, 2:17 a.m. He stands, pacing between his desk and the window that looks out onto the courthouse square, empty and bathed in soft lamplight. He remembers the clause he activated on Rowan's slap, but now sees a larger war to fight. Back at the desk, he assembles the first 3 files, the ones with the most disturbing patterns. The Crooms family case, June 2021. A 16-year-old boy stopped for alleged suspicious behavior, thrown to the ground, and held in a neck restraint until he passed out. No body cam footage ever filed. Complaint buried. The Greenwood incident, October 2020. A white teenager allegedly jaywalking, yet forced into a police cruiser for resisting. The teen's lawyer found internal emails describing him as uncooperative, but the actual video shows compliance. The Marshall detainment, January 2018. Renee Marshall's own arrest, weeks before she became a journalist. She was held for 4 hours without charge. Her complaint vanished into an internal archive. He places those 3 atop the others and leans back, closing his eyes. A single tear escapes, trailing down his cheek. He tastes it, salt and sorrow. How many lives were diminished by this hush? He wonders. How many tears unseen, voices unheard? He wipes his cheek and stands, walking over to his filing cabinet. Inside, rows of locked drawers hold decades of internal affairs records. He jots down the 3 case numbers on a scrap of paper, then pulls open the top drawer and retrieves a ledger labeled "Sealed Confidential." Returning to his desk, he flips through the ledger, noting handwriting changes, missing pages, redacted paragraphs. He sees the same bureaucratic language repeated. Handled per procedure. No further action required. Complainant notified. Only the stories behind the language change. Children terrified, mothers pleading, families waiting in vain for acknowledgement. His hand tightens around the edge of the desk. The sorrow in those letters is personal now. He thinks of Jalen Ford, the boy in this trial, and of every teenager who sat in handcuffs because no one held the system to account. He lifts his journal, leather-bound, pages thick with decades of notes, and writes in bold, deliberate strokes. Order full reinvestigation of all IA complaints against Precinct 9. Unseal files. Notify each complainant of review status. Appoint independent counsel. He pauses, reading the words. Then, in a swift motion, he stamps the order with his official seal and signs beneath it. Benjamin Carter, Presiding Judge, Internal Review Directive 8.3. He summons Teresa via the intercom. When she enters, he hands her the directive. Send this to the court administrator, the State Judicial Oversight Office, and the district attorney's desk. Copy the county clerk for public record. Teresa's eyes widen. Your Honor, this is going to open years of closed doors. Carter meets her gaze. It has to. Silence has been the enemy of justice for too long. He turns back to the folders. Compile contact information for every complainant. Draft letters to inform them their cases will be re-examined. We owe them at least that respect. Teresa nods, hurrying out to carry his orders to the registrar's office. Carter remains at his desk, sorting the 213 folders into stacks by year, severity, and type of alleged misconduct. The coffee has gone cold, leaving only a bitter ring in the cup. He picks up the file on the Crooms family, reads the margin note. Video missing. Internal error. He taps his pen against the folder. That error had cost a boy his breath. He writes another note on a yellow index card. Locate backup server logs for 06-15-21. Subpoena IT director for explanation. He pulls a fresh folder from the cabinet, labeled Supplemental Evidence, and places the card inside. Rows of similar cards decorate the folder's edge, each one a promise to dig deeper, find the truth, and give voice to the silenced. As the sky outside the window lightens from navy to steel gray, Carter flips open his journal again. He writes a final line for the night. Anger fuels resolve. Tomorrow, the first hearing on reopened cases. Let no one doubt that when the law speaks, it speaks for all. He leans back, closing both the journal and the top folder. For a long moment, he allows himself to feel the ache of what's been hidden, the families betrayed, the victims ignored. Then he stands, picks up his gavel, and taps it lightly on the desk. Tomorrow, we fight. With that, he switches off the lamp and walks quietly from the chambers, leaving behind a desk strewn with the evidence of systemic failure and the first glimmer of its undoing. The morning of the big move dawned cool and clear as Judge Carter stepped through the side door of the state courthouse's grand main hall. Gone were the oak-paneled walls of Smithfield's smaller courtroom. This chamber could seat more than 200, its vaulted ceiling and wide balconies designed for major trials and public ceremonies. By 7:15, Renee Marshall was already there, shoulder-strap bag slung low, notepad and recorder at the ready. She nodded to Carter as he crossed the polished marble floor. Behind her, Raymond Ellis and Amamira Johnson arrived side by side. Two of the voices Carter had asked to stand with him. No one clapped or cheered. They simply exchanged determined looks. Carter paused at the front row, scanning the empty seats as lighting technicians adjusted camera angles around the perimeter. He wore his robe as always, but today it carried a different weight. A symbol not only of authority, but of the promise he'd made to bring every facet of this trial into the open. At 8 o'clock, the media scrum leaned forward as he took the bench. Reporters settled into a press riser off to one side, videographers framing the gallery entrances. A discreet sign read, "No live filming during testimony. Full video permitted before and after." Carter tapped the microphone. It crackled once, then silenced. He let the quiet settle before speaking. "Good morning," he began, voice carrying easily. "We are here not simply to adjudicate one officer's conduct, but to examine how our institutions respond when the law itself is challenged. Transparency is not a buzzword. It is the cornerstone of public trust." He paused, letting his words echo under the high ceiling. "Today's session will be open to the fullest extent consistent with witness privacy. I encourage every citizen, every journalist to observe, record, and reflect. We will reconvene here each day of this trial." A ripple of low murmurs ran through the gallery, but Carter held the moment. Then, with a single nod, he signaled the clerk to call the roll. Rowan appeared in custody box stage left, his uniform exchanged for prison attire. He surveyed the room as though realizing its size for the first time. Jalen Ford and his mother sat not far from Renee, leaning in as though absorbing Carter's words. As the clerk called names, Carter felt the tension settle into a different shape, a quiet charge of expectation. The large hall, once a stage for official pomp, had become a crucible where law, power, and public will would meet. When the final name was called, Carter delivered his opening command. "Let us proceed with the first witness." He tapped his gavel, and the trial officially began in its grandest, most public form yet. Outside, the crowd that gathered on the courthouse steps spilled over into the plaza as onlookers craned their necks to glimpse the tall windows above. Inside, Carter's eyes swept the rows of faces, ordinary citizens, survivors of past injustices, journalists hungry for truth. In that moment, he knew the real trial had already begun, not just of one man, but of an entire system forced into the light. The moment Officer Rowan stood to face the judge's bench, you could almost feel the air in the courtroom solidify. Cameras shifted to capture every angle as Carter spoke only 2 words: "Bring him forward." 2 bailiffs stepped up, unfastening Rowan's cuffs long enough to move him, then reapplying the irons in plain sight of every live feed. The click of steel against steel rang out like a judge's gavel in slow motion. Rowan's uniform, once crisp and authoritative, now hung on him like a shroud of consequence. Carter watched without a flicker of triumph. He understood the gravity of this moment. A serving officer handcuffed in the very chamber where he enforced the law. It wasn't spectacle, it was accountability incarnate. Rowan's eyes flicked to the jurors, then to Jalen Ford, who sat with his mother in the front row. Jalen's wide eyes met Rowan's for an instant, a silent exchange of pain and vindication. Tanya Ford clutched her son's hand, her knuckles white, but her posture resolute. "Officer Rowan," Carter said quietly, "you will remain in custody pending further order of this court. This is not a punishment of emotion, but a measure of necessity. The presumption of innocence does not extend to violence against the judicial office." His voice was calm, final. Rowan's shoulders sagged as the bailiffs led him to the holding cell window at the back. He passed under the gallery, each step echoing on the marble floor like a confession. Reporters' lenses followed, but no one spoke. The silence was profound, more powerful than applause. Carter allowed that silence to settle, then tapped his gavel twice. "Let us proceed," he commanded, and the courtroom came alive again with the rustle of papers and shuffling feet. The prosecutor rose to continue cross-examination, but Carter interjected. "Before we do, I want to acknowledge the gravity of what's just transpired. An officer of the law, in uniform, was restrained in the name of justice. Let that fact guide every word we speak today." The witness next in line took the stand, nerves visible in trembling hands. Carter's gaze never left them, protective, measured, reminding all that this trial was about uncovering truth, not yielding to fear. Outside, the live viewer count ticked upward, 200,000 and climbing. In homes across the country, people watched in hushed awe as the system they trusted demonstrated its self-correcting power. Back inside, Jalen looked up at his mother, a single tear slipping down his cheek. She squeezed his hand, and he nodded, as if he finally believed someone was listening. Rowan's muffled voice floated back from the holding cell, a low murmur of regret or defiance. No one could tell. Carter closed his eyes briefly, steeling himself. He had set this chain in motion, and now it was time to see it through. "Proceed," he said, and the trial pressed on. But no one would forget the moment when the gavel's echo was matched by the clink of handcuffs. The moment when justice, restrained no longer by fear or bias, tightened its grip on the very symbols of power. Outside the courthouse steps, dusk had settled into a velvet blue as a small crowd gathered, candles flickering against the darkening sky. No speakers, no rallying cries, just ordinary people standing shoulder to shoulder, each holding a simple sign. No more silence. Justice can't be struck down, and we are watching. Renee Marshall stood among them, recorder clipped to her bag strap, watching as passers-by slowed to peer up at the lit windows of the grand main hall. A handful of law students from the local university held umbrellas over elderly neighbors who'd come with trembling hands but steady eyes. Nearby, Amamira Johnson and Raymond Ellis exchanged quiet nods, their presence a testament to the solidarity born of shared pain. Inside, Judge Carter emerged from the side door, robes replaced by a long overcoat, the day's trials etched on his face. Reporters flocked for a quick word, but he offered only a gentle nod and moved toward the vigil without stopping. His steps were measured, each one a bridge between the courtroom's solemnity and the community's yearning for justice. As he approached, the small assemblage parted respectfully. Carter paused, scanning the rows of flickering candles reflected in wide eyes. A soft hush fell over the plaza, no applause, but a deep collective intake of breath, as though the city itself exhaled hope. One elderly woman, her hair silver in the streetlight, stepped forward. She pressed a single daisy into Carter's hand. "For your courage," she said, voice quivering. "We waited so long to see someone stand." He took the flower and nodded, eyes moist but steady. In that silent exchange, he felt the weight of every unspoken story this city carried. He lifted his head and addressed the group, his voice low but carrying clear in the still air. "Thank you," he began. "Tonight, you remind me why this work matters. Not for fame, not for headlines, but for every person who believes in fairness." He glanced at the signs and the candlelight dancing across determined faces. Justice isn't a destination. It's a promise we renew every day. A ripple of gentle agreement passed through the crowd. Some lowered their signs. Others simply held their candles higher, as though lifting their collective resolve. Carter tucked the daisy into his coat pocket. He turned to Renee. "Thank you for bringing their stories forward." She nodded, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. Together, they looked out over the vigil, a mosaic of solidarity and candlelight. After a moment, Carter stepped back, giving the crowd space to breathe. The vigil remained, undisturbed, as he retraced his steps toward the courthouse. Inside, the hall lights shone like watchful beacons, ready for tomorrow's proceedings. In the plaza, the candles burned on, casting warm halos against the marble steps. Passers-by paused, snapped photos, then slipped away quietly, each carrying a spark of hope lit by their own candle. And at the center of that glow, the courthouse stood unmoved, its doors ajar to transparency, its steps echoing with the steady footfalls of a community reawakened. Judge Carter didn't seek attention when word leaked that he'd been quietly nominated to the Supreme Court 2 years ago and that he'd formally declined. But this morning, that letter slipped out. A single page on White House stationery, opening lines stark in his precise hand. "Mr. President, I deeply respect the honor, but I cannot accept while justice remains trampled beneath it." The news hit social feeds like a conduit of clarity. Headlines asked why a man who just commanded national attention wouldn't seize the highest judicial seat. Carter sat at his desk, eyes on the quiet square outside his window. where candles from last night's vigil still flickered in memory. In classrooms across the state, professors paused their lectures to project the letter. Justice demands not the highest perch, but the firmest ground. Law students debated whether true influence lay in Washington or here at Smithfield, in a smaller courtroom where every case felt personal. A local artist painted a mural on the courthouse wall, Carter's calm profile, a red handprint across his cheek, and beneath it, the words he'd penned in his journal months ago. Justice doesn't need revenge. It needs endurance. Neighbors passed by, pausing to add fresh flowers and leave notes quoting his vow to stay. On the courthouse steps, young mothers showed their children the spot where Carter stood his ground, telling them that sometimes the bravest act is refusing to climb higher when there are still battles to be fought below. That afternoon, as dusk gilded the columns, Carter strolled past the mural. He didn't linger. His work awaited him in the courtroom, but he allowed himself a quiet nod to the painting, an acknowledgement that the choices we make where it matters most ripple far beyond any title or seat. If you believe no one is above the law, share this video, and subscribe to join our fight for justice. Your views and comments make a real difference.